ahead and share my screen. Go ahead and get started. So some of you probably remember me from other presentations. So this is where I work, the Cable Natural History Museum. I've been here almost 12 years now, which is a long time in my life. And the museum is a private nonprofit supported by memberships and donations from people just like you. We would love to have you come down for a visit. It is great leaf peeping time, as you know, so it's a beautiful drive. And we're pretty proud of ourselves. We're part of only 3% of museums nationwide that are accredited. And so that's a big deal for a museum in a town of 800 people. And this is where we are, that big red star. If you aren't sure where cable is, blink and you'll miss it. And this is a big part of what I do at the Cable Natural History Museum. I write a weekly Natural Connections newspaper column, and my first 4 years and my second 4 years have been compiled into a book each. But there's a lot of ways you can connect with me with my Natural Connection stuff. So I do weekly articles, and they're in a bunch of local newspapers, including the Duluth Reader Weekly. You can also sign up for our email newsletter so you don't miss a single article. And my articles are also archived on our blog, which is searchable. And sometimes I use it in lieu of having a searchable brain to remember things that I once knew and then forgot. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And I also record my articles as podcasts. So if you prefer to listen, they're 6 to 7 minutes long, published every Thursday at noon on iTunes and Google Podcasts, and probably some other places too. We kind of blast it out there. So lots of different ways that you can follow along with the Natural Connection stuff, because they talk about a lot of similar things that we'll be going over tonight. A little bit of my history. So I was born in Northeast Iowa to naturalist parents. There was no way escaping my fate. And my dad called me his mud and water daughter, and we did a lot of bird watching as we drove around Iowa. So I went to Northland College for undergrad, and then the University of Vermont for my master's in the Field Naturalist Master's Program. And right now, my biggest influence has been Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. If you have not read this book, you should read this book. And very soon there is sort of almost like a Reader's Digest version for like teens and preteens coming out. So the kids version of Braiding Sweetgrass will be out soon. So if there's a young person in your life who needs some good nature connection, that might be a good Christmas gift. But Robin Wall Kimmerer is an amazing naturalist and philosopher, and I'm acknowledging her because a lot of the ideas that I'll be talking about tonight, I've sort of integrated into my own philosophy after reading her work. And so that's part of the reason why my talk is called Natural Connections, Natural Gifts tonight. So we'll start with a little example to get you thinking about what natural gifts really mean. So first of all, here's a picture of cherry tomatoes from my garden. And, you know, if we were to put a label on these natural resources, you might think you had a whole flat of tomatoes, and maybe if a couple went bad, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Or maybe you felt like you had such abundance that you could sell a bunch of them to Heinz to make in a ketchup or something. So when we use the word natural resources, it really changes the way that we interact with nature. But, you know, as us gardeners know, those cherry tomatoes, they can be like gold. And especially if they are given to you by someone, you are going to cherish them and make sure you eat every single one of them in an appropriate way so that none of them go to waste. And so Robin Wall Kimmerer advises that if we would use the term natural gifts instead of natural resources, we would be treating everything in the natural world as if it was a cherished cherry tomato from our friend's garden, instead of something that we could use at will and potentially waste if there is extra and not take as good care of it. So that's something just to put in the back of your head as we talk about the rest of the cool natural connections in the slideshow tonight. So I use this quote a lot. I just love it. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. We're all stardust. We are really connected to everything else in the universe through a bunch of different ways. And so everything could be thought of as a natural gift. And when we think about all those connections, everything being hitched to everything else, it's nice to maybe think about it as this beautiful orb weaver spider web. Too bad Larry Weber isn't in the audience here. Very organized and orderly and symmetrical. But in reality, those connections are a little bit more like this, a nice cobweb spider web. Just connections all over the place, everything connected to everything else in multiple ways. And it's really a wonderful thing that we have all those connections, because it takes all of those connections to support a life. That is the web of life, the food web, the web that supports us and every other living thing. And so one of my favorite stories about connections in nature and that web that supports us begins in this fen. This is the Namakagon Fen State Natural Area, just a couple miles from my house. Even though it's a state natural area, I like to call it my fen. And it is a magical place, partly because of who lives there. So this beautiful flower belongs to this leaf, a pitcher plant leaf. And pitcher plants are just one of the coolest organisms that I have ever encountered. And partly because they are their own little community, a community of connections inside that leaf. And so, you know, everything you see in that picture is an adaptation that helps that pitcher plant survive. So the red lines are nectar guides and attractants to insects. There's actually sweet nectar coating the outside of the leaf, and it's really concentrated here on the nectar roll, which is also very slippery. So if you're an ant and you see this beautiful red highway leading right up the side of this sweet leaf, and wow, that's really sweet there, and then whoop, whoopsie daisy, into the water you fall. So this is a carnivorous plant that is built to catch insects like ants. And so the ant might float around on the surface of the water for a while, but this part of the leaf right here is really slippery. And then there's all these downward facing hairs to prevent escape. And so that leaf is absolutely designed to trap ants and other insects. And for a long time, people just thought that the plant had enzymes in it that took care of the digestion. But actually, there's a whole lot more going on, starting with this guy. This is a flesh fly larva, which is kind of a terrible name. I like to call him a cookie monster instead, because he's a very messy eater. So a flesh fly larva is a fly larva, and some members of the group would feed on roadkill or something. But this one feeds on the ants that fall into the pitcher plants, and they shred. So just like Cookie Monster, the ant falls in and the flesh fly larva goes, and all the crumbs fall down through the water column. Another really cool fact about these guys is this is the fly. It's kind of a normal looking fly that lays the egg, but she actually doesn't lay an egg. She incubates the egg inside her body and deposits a live larva in the pitcher plant. And I mean, that's just crazy. We think that insects have to lay eggs, right? But actually some of them can lay live babies. And the reason she has to do that is that a pitcher plant leaf is a one-horse town. If there are two flesh fly larvae in there, one will eat the other one. And so she can't risk laying an egg next to another egg. So that is the first line of digestion in a pitcher plant leaf. And then all those Cookie Monster crumbs float down through the water column, and there are pitcher plant mosquito larvae in the water column, and they're filter feeders. So they are catching the crumbs in those hairs around their face and guiding the food into their mouth. And they have to breathe air as do the flesh fly larvae. So they're actually going up and down within the water column, going up to get a sip of air from the surface through their butt, and then back down into the water column, avoiding the pitcher plant and avoiding the flesh fly larvae while they're doing it. So the pitcher plant mosquito might miss some crumbs and is also pooping, and all of that can be nutrition. Oh, that's the adult. Oh, cool fact about the pitcher plant mosquito is that they get so much nutrition as a juvenile, they do not need a blood meal as an adult. They don't bite animals, so you don't have to hate them. Okay, so their leftovers, missed crumbs, waste goes down to the bottom of the pitcher plant leaf, and there are midge larvae. Midges are just little gnatty type things, and midge larvae have gills, so they don't need to come to the surface, and they're decomposers. So they're taking in all the leftovers and excreting waste that is basically broken down into the component nutrients. And then what's left over looks like this. So these are all the hard parts. And the nitrogen and phosphorus are free in the water and are absorbed by the pitcher plant through some cells on the base of its leaf that don't have the waxy cuticle. And so that is how the pitcher plant digests the food and has access to nitrogen and phosphorus, even though it lives in such a crazy nutrient poor environment. You can see here it's in a habitat that includes cranberry vines and bog rosemary, but also the sphagnum moss that's acidifying the environment and preventing decomposition and reducing the cycling of nutrients otherwise. So this pitcher plant is pretty amazing. You know, it's a little community within itself, and it's hosting all of these partners just so that it can get enough nitrogen and phosphorus in order to survive in this crazy habitat of the bog. And what's truly amazing about this community inside the pitcher plant is that it is not a zero-sum game. If you take out one of those partners, there isn't more food left for the rest of them. They all do worse. So each of those critters needs each other to work at breaking down all of the food and making it useful. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it appears elsewhere too, but all flourishing is mutual. Everybody does better when everybody does better. And it happens in pitcher plants. It happens a lot of other places in nature. And I think it would happen a lot more in our human communities if we would let it. So here's another cool story of natural connections and all flourishing being mutual. This is such a delightful little plant in the forest. You encounter it generally late July and August. And ghost pipe is this pure white plant. And so it cannot do photosynthesis. So just like the pitcher plant can't get all the nutrients it needs from its habitat, the ghost pipe can't actually make its own sugar. And so it needs to rely on help, just like the pitcher plant does. And the help that the ghost pipe relies on is a rusula mushroom. And so rusulas, they're really common mushrooms out there in the woods, delightful, often with a little pink cap that has white spots, not because they're an amanita, but because squirrels and slugs like to nibble on them and make them polka dotted. The other really fun thing about a rusula, which some mycologists think this is a little juvenile, but if you throw one against a tree, they explode. They have a really unique texture and it's really fun. There's lots of them around. So if you pick an old one that's already released its spores, no harm, no foul. You're just breaking it down so it'll compost better, right? So rusula mushrooms are really common mushrooms in the forest, and they partner with oak trees. So you've probably heard of the wood wide web of mycorrhizal relationships. And so rusula mushrooms, their mycelium, their little white webby root-like things, connect to the roots of oak trees. And that's where they are getting their sugar. So the oak tree sends its sugar down to the rusula mushroom and helps the rusula mushroom grow. the rusula needs sugar, just like most living things. And the rusula mushroom in exchange is sending water and nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus actually back up to the oak tree. And so they have a really nice symbiotic relationship where the oak tree is extending its root network, is getting more things from the soil than it could on its own. And the rusula mushroom is getting sugar that the oak tree makes in its leaves through photosynthesis. So this is kind of the whole idea of the, or at least the start of the idea of the wood wide web. And then the rusula mushroom takes some of the sugar that it just got from that oak tree, and it actually sends it through the soil to the ghost pipe. And so the ghost pipe is surviving in the deep, dark, shady depths of the forest by getting sugar that was created by an oak tree and sent through the mycorrhizal network of a rusula mushroom, which is just an amazing, amazing relationship. And, you know, I taught about this to a group of master naturalists this summer. And, you know, kind of the first reaction people had was, well, isn't it kind of a mooch? You know, like, what is the ghost pipe giving back? And people are really uncomfortable with the idea of a mooch in our culture. And I didn't really have a good answer for them, but, you know, as soon as I posted some pictures to my iNaturalist account, if you haven't used iNaturalist before, it's a really cool website where you can upload photos. It helps you identify them. And then scientists can actually go in and look at your observations and use them for your research projects. So I got a message from a dude out east somewhere who's studying the thrips, the little insects who live on the ghost pipe flowers. And so he asked me to go out and actually collect, and because we're a museum, we had collecting supplies. So I collected some of the ghost pipe flowers from my own woods so that he could study all the little insects that have a relationship with them. And that started to give me an idea of like, oh, wow, like this flower may not be a complete mooch. Like here are some of the ways it might be interacting with the ecosystem. And there it goes as it matures. It's been pollinated already once the flower starts to straighten up, and its little seeds are developing inside there. And pretty soon it'll be straight up and down and black and weird looking, just in time for Halloween. And then the seed pod splits open by sutures along the sides, and little dusty seeds fly out like a salt shaker, kind of. So a cool plant, and I'm participating in a research project about the critters that use it. And in doing more research about the thrips and the other stuff that this researcher got me thinking about, I discovered that these are actually really good sources of nectar. And so the ghost pipe is taking sugar, it's kind of stolen from the oak tree through the mushroom and turning it into nectar in the deep, dark, shady depths of the forest, where really there's no other flowers growing. And it's pollinated by bees. Who doesn't love bees? Well, Dutchman's breeches loves bees. So this got me thinking about like how, you know, what would the benefit be to the forest? Why would this be so important that the ecosystem would support this mooch of a flower in the understory? Well, Dutchman's breeches and many other of our spring wildflowers, but this one I thought of because this little flower that only blooms in May and has to go really quick before the trees leaf out, it can really only be successfully pollinated by bumblebees because of the shape of the flower. So the bumblebee has to pry open the waistband of the pants on the Dutchman's breeches and stick its long tongue up into the corner of the ankles to get at the nectar and pollinate the flower. But the thing about bumblebees, oh, and then beautiful flower. The thing about bumblebees is that they're one of our colony forming bees. So they survive all summer long, and all summer long, you know, the bee here is a queen who just emerged from hibernation in this spring. And so she is gathering the resources to start her colony, to lay some eggs who will become her daughters, who will raise more eggs over the course of the summer. And so bumblebees need nectar all summer long in the forest. I just love all the positions they get in. And it's really important that we have bumblebees, not just any bees, because you can see how far she's sticking her head into those petals. But other bees aren't so strong and get frustrated, and actually they're nectar thieves. So smaller bees would chew through the petals and steal the nectar without pollinating the flower. So we need specific bees in the understory to pollinate this wonderful spring wildflower so that it can create seeds. So Dutchman's breeches is a true spring ephemeral. By June, there's nothing left of it in the forest, but it did produce these wonderful seeds. And what's cool about Dutchman's breeches seeds is that they have this little white fleshy appendage on them called an elaiosome. And an elaiosome is a little packet of fats and proteins, and it smells delicious to ants. It's kind of like a donut for ants. They're really attracted to it. And also it makes a really great handle. So ants will come along, they'll pick up the seed by the elaiosome, carry it back to their nest, chew off the elaiosome, and use that nutrition to feed themselves or their young, and then toss the seed into their waste heap, which of course is the perfect place for a seed to be, protected from fire and birds who are seed predators underneath the ground where they can then sprout. And because of this, many of our spring wildflowers are ant dispersed. Myrmecochory is the term for ant dispersal. And many of our spring wildflowers grow in little clumps where maybe there was an anthill full of their seeds from last year. So bloodroot uses elaisomes, trailing arbutus uses elaisomes, spring beauty, violets, trout lilies, trilliums. And ants themselves are really important in our ecosystem for a lot of ways. Many of you may know that worms are not native to anywhere that the glaciers were recently, because the glaciers froze them all out. We've brought worms back. It's fine in gardens, not so fine in our woods. And, you know, the reason we want them in our gardens is because worms are really good at turning the soil and aerating the soil and mixing it up. And ants actually do that same thing in more northern ecosystems. And so they have some really important functions. Another interesting connection with these elaisomes is that if you've ever had trilliums, you know that sometimes they get nibbled off by the deer, and you might curse them for that. But those seeds actually can travel through the gut of a deer unharmed. And so deer may actually also be seed dispersers of trilliums and others of our spring ephemerals who have the elaisomes on their seeds too. So one vote for deer among many other reasons why I get annoyed by them. All right, so this discussion has mostly started off, you know, lots of different connections with the ghost pipe and the Dutchman's breeches, and it's all connected by pollinators. So I just love this photo. This bumblebee is just hugging this little spring beauty flower so hard it just fell over on top of it. So spring walks are entertaining. And we hear lots of information, headlines about save our pollinators. And this is a really classic picture of all the food that we have with bees and all the food that would disappear if we didn't have bees and other pollinators. The problem with this meme and this poster is that that's a honeybee, and honeybees are not native to North America. They are only 1 out of 20,000 types of bees in the world, and they are not even very good at pollinating most things. So this is just a little snapshot of diversity. We did a bee exhibit down here a few years ago and learned that in Northwest Wisconsin, so probably pretty similar to Duluth, there are 166 species of native bees that aren't honeybees. And they're really good at pollinating things. even things that aren't native. So this is a bumblebee and a crabapple. And native bees are actually much better at pollinating apple trees than honeybees. And honeybees are actually physically unable to pollinate our wonderful tomato plants in our gardens because our tomatoes require buzz pollination, which requires someone stronger than a honeybee. Bumblebees are the most similar to honeybees in one way, in that they have a small colony and they do actually produce small amounts of honey to feed their colony. But most of our native bees are pretty different. Solitary, most of our bees are solitary, and so it's, I don't know what I got in my throat. A little piece of pollen. So most of our bees, native bees, are solitary, and so it's one female laying about 15 eggs in a tunnel nest, either in the ground or in a hollow twig or in a hollow stem like this. And so she gathers a wad of pollen, makes it moldable with a little bit of nectar or her own saliva, and lays a single egg, walls it off, creates another cell with bee bread and an egg, and does about 15 of those. And that's it for her whole life. And so solitary bees are really unique and different, and a lot of them are really specialized with what flowers they pollinate. So this is a little solitary bee, beautiful shiny green one. And if I change the focus, you notice that the bee that's so important for pollination is also part of the food web in a different way. So it's being eaten by a crab spider, who can change from yellow to white to hide on whatever flower they happen to be sitting on, and then waits for the pollinators and ambushes them. And, you know, now that I've just been reminding you, I'm sure you already knew how awesome pollinators are. It can be hard to think about the spider eating the little bee. But spiders have a major role to play in our ecosystem as well, besides eating insects that are, and the pesky ones. Spiders are also really important bird food. So hummingbirds eat a lot of super tiny spiders and feed them to their babies. And chickadees, they have found, need to eat extra spiders during a specific week of brain development as chicks in order to fully develop their brain and become the gregarious, curious chickadees that we know and love. As a side note, if they eat too many spiders, it can actually result in something similar to chickadee ADHD. So the right amount of spiders at the right time is very important. And it's all because of an amino acid that is specifically found in spiders and also in some of our energy drinks and stuff. So spiders are really important to our beloved birds, as are caterpillars. So a single pair of breeding chickadees must find 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to rear one clutch of young. This is a fact from Doug Tallamy, author of Bringing Nature Home, a wonderful book, which many of you have probably heard of. So this is a hemlock caterpillar, a hemlock butterfly, I think. I looked it up on iNaturalist when I found it. Cute little guy. Probably gonna become bird food for chickadees or some other little critter. And well, this one is a hemlock caterpillar. Oaks are really one of the champions of hosting insects. So, you know, this is an oak leaf showing damage from a leaf miner. And these are some galls on an oak leaf, also caused by some type of insect. Some more oak leaf galls of a different shape from a different critter. And oak apple gall, one of the most common ones we may see. And these aren't even all caterpillars. A lot of the wasps are, or a lot of the galls are started by wasps or midges or other little critters. But oak trees just host a lot of different living things and are a huge part of the food chain. And you might remember how important oaks are to ghost pipe as well, since they are feeding the rusula that feeds the ghost pipe. Another native plant that's really important is goldenrod. You know, there's fields of it in many places. It doesn't cause your allergies because its pollen is really heavy and sticky. It doesn't blow on the wind. It just blooms at the same time as ragweed, which is horrible. But this is a late summer shot. You know, goldenrod was one of the only flowers left around, and all bumblebees from an area are nectaring on that one flower. But of course, goldenrod also supports other insects. Oftentimes there's this little gall on the stem, and that's caused by a fly who lays an egg, and the fly larva chews its way into the stem. The chewing action and chemicals in the saliva of the larva cause the gall to form around it. And then you have this beautiful chunky white larva that actually spends all winter inside that gall. And I do a science project with 6th graders about the galls and the diameter and what you find inside. And then in the spring, they pupate and emerge as a fly to start all over again. But one of the cool connections with this larva is that in the winter, it feeds our birds too. So you might notice either galls that have holes in them, or you might actually spot a downy clinging to the stem of a goldenrod, pecking into the gall and eating out that tiny little larva, which is also good as fish bait and also edible for humans. I let my 6th graders eat the goldenrod gallfly larvae they find during our experiments. They are slightly sweet because they use glycerol as an antifreeze. So, you know, all these different connections between plants feeding insects and insects feeding other animals, including our beloved chickadees and other birds. Just so many different connections within the community. And so, you know, we can also ask ourselves, what part do we play in this connected community? So remember, it looks like this, massive connections. But you know, these days it's looking a little bit more sparse. I was just reading some headlines this morning about some dire statistics about how many critters, how many vertebrates we have lost since 1970. And there's always more bad news about how we are wrecking the earth and how the web that supports all life is getting thinner and less well connected. But I don't like to talk about bummer stuff. We started this all talking about pollinators, and that's a good place to have some hope, right? Because any of us can plant beautiful bee balm in our yard and have butterflies and bees and everything else flying around. And this time of year, it looks more like that, which is just fine. And so as we think about the part we can play in our connected community, sorry about that, you know, we can leave the leaves and leave a messy garden. Those messages are everywhere right now. But if you leave those dried flower stalks in your garden, the seeds can become food for winter birds, and they might scratch around on the snow in your garden all winter long. So there's no need to go in and cut down your flower stalks, especially if you're native plants. Go ahead and hack off your peonies. I don't think anything native needs those, but anything that you've planted that's a native or a pollinator flower, leave that for the birds. And then in the spring, and not until the spring, you can go ahead and cut those off and cut them off at different heights. Because then the stalks will have different inner diameters, and different sizes of solitary bees will be able to build their nest in those hollow plant stems. So this is, you know, just a little thing that you can do to bring that community into your own yard. Another thing you could do is make sure that you're planting native species. If you're going to plant a tree, plant an oak or a cherry. They are some of the champions of supporting diversity of insects that support a diversity of birds. And then when those trees drop their leaves, don't rake them up, leave them on the ground to capture snow like this. And also those fallen leaves are good insulation for bumblebees, their nest in the summer, and also their hibernation in the fall. So I was really excited last fall. I captured this photo. The smaller bee is a drone. So I think it's a male bee that, you know, they only have one small generation at the end of each summer, and they're finding a new queen to mate with, and then the drones die. And then that big bee on the left is the new queen who's going to find a mate and then go dive into a rotting log or under some leaf litter to survive the winter. So we need to make sure that she has a warm, protected place to spend the winter, or else there won't be a new bumblebee colony in the spring. So, you know, these are just a reminder that it's also good to change our attitude and our perspective so that we aren't looking at things as natural resources. We're thinking about them as natural gifts. And when we just switch that little bit of wording, we end up going through the world with a lot more gratitude. And, you know, as much as action is important, I think that having an attitude of gratitude toward nature and thinking about what we receive from the natural world as our natural gifts can help inspire us in a lot of little ways to take care of nature as it takes care of us. And when you have that attitude of gratitude, where the ungrateful heart receives only rain, grateful heart discovers diamonds everywhere, and you get to see a world that is just full of treasure. You know, nature is amazing, it is beautiful, it is wonderful, it is exciting and interesting, and anything we can do to learn about it and be grateful for it and help protect it while we're alive and while it's still alive is wonderful. My geology professor, one of his favorite sayings is, the world is beautiful at all scales. You know, and he's talking about everything from a mineral thin section up to the whole earth on the scale of geology. But the world is also sort of protectable at all scales. So you can work to make the earth a better place for all living things at the scale of your own backyard, or this is the museum's pollinator garden where we've got kids running around among the flowers and the bees and the spiders. Or if you have the means, you can work to protect entire forests. This is the Boundary Waters. You know, I have a recurring donation every month to the Save the Boundary Waters Fund because it is an amazing place. And maybe you have your own way of supporting big projects like this, or voting to support our ecosystems at a much larger scale too. So our work can be valuable at all scales too. And it's the butterfly effect, where we flap a little and it changes the world. So that's all for my talk. Thank you very much, and I would be happy to take questions if you have any.
Any comments, questions, observations?
Emily, this is Eric. You lived up to your previous two talks, so nice job. Very good presentation.
Thanks, Eric.
Emily, wonderfully done. Thank you.
Thanks.
My question is, where are the bumblebee nests in my yard?
Where are the bumblebee nests in your yard? I've never found one myself. I've been told that they like to take over old mouse nests. So kind of shallow, grassy holes. And they're probably near the edges if you have some wild places or brush piles, or, you know, places that you never clean out. That would be my guess. But I've never found one myself. So that's a really great question. They actually are training dogs to sniff out rusty patch bumblebee nests as a conservation tool. So that's pretty exciting. Those dogs could tell you where the nests are, but I can't.
Emily, this is Elias. What was your final conclusion on the ghost pipe as being a mooch plant?
Yeah, I think it's a really important source of nectar in the deep, dark forest. That
those-
is, right now, that's my thought about sort of its most important role in the ecosystem. You know, it's bringing nectar into a place, into a time of year when there really isn't another source of nectar for bees.
Oh, for bees. Okay. And supporting those thrips that you found on there.
Right, yep. And
Yeah.
that's part of what the scientists are studying. They don't really know all the little critters that are potentially feeding or living on the ghost pipes. And so I will be sure to report on that in my natural connections column once those researchers conclude their study. I think they found some thrips. They're hoping for more. We'll see. People who have houseplants think of thrips as a pest, but there must be some place for them in the natural world. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Any other questions or observations of, I really enjoyed how you talked about the pitcher plant as a community and all the things that are just so interdependent, and the whole chain between, the oak and the mushroom to the ghost pipe, and then so on and so forth. I wonder if anybody else is aware of any other, communities or chains of that kind that we could share about.
That's fine. You can read about some more of them in my Natural Connections book or blog if you want to check those out.
I think Greg is trying to talk, but he's muted.
Emily,
There we go.
what is your address for your Natural Connections blog? Is there a line for that we can?
Yeah,
we can
the
get in
easiest
touch
way
with
to
you?
find it, the easiest way to find my blog is to go to the Cable Natural History Museum website, so cablemuseum.org. You can just Google Cable Natural History Museum, and then there's a tab at the top of the website that says publications, and so all my Natural Connections links are under that tab, and that's
cablenaturalhistorymuseum.org.
the website is just cablemuseum.org,
cablemuseum.org.
or you can Google Cable Natural
Okay,
History Museum
okay.
and it'll come up.
Yeah, that'd be fun to get to know you through the net.
Yeah. Yep.
To hear what you're thinking about.
Yep. There's more detail on the ghost pipe story if you type that into the search in the blog too.
Jeff, I'll mention one. This is Jan that I don't know enough about, but we have wildflowers front and back in our little yards on Park Point. And actually was, I think, Dan Schutte, who does Shoreview Natives, North Shore, whatever it's called. Anyhow, he noticed that there was a clump of goldenrod in our very small front yard, which the golden oxeye have mostly taken over. And there's not a lot of bee balm there. But he said the goldenrod will keep the oxeye out and make space so that the bee balm can come in. So I thought
That's
that was
really cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I've been leaving my wildflowers all winter because both for the seeds, but I like the way they look coming out of the snow. I find them very, very pretty in the snow. So
Yeah, they're very artistic with little snow caps on them. I agree.
right. And thank you very much for a lovely presentation. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing.
Any other questions, comments, or thoughts? Well, I mean, so many people have already thanked you, Emily, but thank you for being with us, for opening our eyes to recognize not only those, communities like a pitcher plant or the oak tree and bees and pollinators, but how, we're so tied into that as well. And in thinking about the whole chain of everything that has to happen to get us what we need, definitely should fill us with gratitude and wonder. So thank you for that.
One more question, Emily.
Oh.
What's the best time of the year to plant oak trees? Winter or fall or spring?
I don't know. You should ask an arborist.
Okay.
I have a wild yard, so I've never planted one. Yep.
All right, are there any events or programs upcoming at the Cable Natural History Museum that we should be aware of?
Oh, that's a great question. Coming up on October 22nd, that Saturday, it's MEA weekend, and we have from 10 to noon, we have a junior naturalist activity day. So it's for kids ages 6 to 12 and really kids of all ages, and their adults to come, and we'll have some really fun stations to learn and play and learn about nature. And then if you want to go for a hike in November during the Wisconsin gun deer season, I have 2 deer widows walks when you can, male or female, anybody who feels cooped up by deer season. We have some property down here at the Forest Lodge Estate that is off limits to deer hunters. And so I have a couple nature walks going out there. So that's most of what's coming up. Yep. And then our the main thing I'm working on right now behind the scenes is our next exhibit is called The Northwoods Rocks. And it's all about the geologic history of the Northwoods, which would be relevant to you guys in Duluth too. So that doesn't open until May 1st, but you can make a plan for a springtime road trip to come down and see us.
Super cool. Thank you for all your work.
Yep. Thanks for inviting me. Enjoy your bird watching, everybody.
Indeed. Just a reminder once again to everybody, the North Shore Sea Duck trip is on Saturday, the 29th of this month. And so you can sign up on Sign Up Genius, which the link to which was sent out in the newsletter. And so, yeah, happy birding to everybody, and stay well, and we'll see you next time.